Hello, Culinary One. Okay, so today I am going to walk you through what is quite possibly my favorite subject in all of culinary arts, and that is foodborne illnesses. If you don't know what a foodborne illness is, maybe you've heard of food poisoning. It's basically the same thing, just using different language. So today we're going to go over some statistics, and figures about foodborne illnesses, like how many of them happen on a yearly basis, who is most affected, and then we're also going to look at what are their names, what are their symptoms, what foods are they associated with, excuse me, and what can happen if you get one. We'll also then talk about foodborne illness prevention. We'll talk about how to thaw food properly, how to cook food properly, and how to store food properly. So, without further ado, let's dive into my favorite subject. Okay, so first things first, we're going to define foodborne illness and foodborne illness outbreak. A foodborne illness is defined as a disease caused by consuming contaminated food or drink. Okay, easy enough, right? Disease comes from contaminated food, contaminated drink. Well, contaminated, right? That means it's bad. Maybe it's dirty. Maybe it has a harmful bacteria or pathogen inside. A foodborne illness outbreak is an incident in which two or more people experience similar illness resulting from the ingestion of a common food. So we might have to break that down real quick. Two or more people have the same sickness, also the same symptoms typically, resulting from ingesting the same food. So a foodborne illness outbreak, here's an example. You and your best friend go to McDonald's after school. You both order a double quarter pounder with cheese, fries. One of you gets a Coke, one of you gets a Sprite. Okay. Let's say later tonight, maybe around bedtime, 9 or 10 o'clock, your stomach starts churning. You're just feeling so sick. You're nauseous. Maybe you throw up. Maybe you have diarrhea. Next thing you know, you get a text from your friend telling you the same thing. I've been throwing up all afternoon. Okay. Two people ate the same thing and experienced the same symptoms. There's a good chance we have a foodborne illness outbreak. Okay. Quick note, I'm going to kind of toggle screens real fast. I want to show you on your note sheet how you can, sorry, I'm going to show you how you can answer your notes best, okay? So foodborne illness. Wherever you see a fill in the blank, sometimes students don't really know what to do. One easy thing to do would be to click and highlight and then type over that. So a disease caused by consuming, keyword here was contaminated. Now I'm going to put it all in caps lock just so you see it and it sticks out. Contaminated. Okay, easy enough. That's probably the easiest thing that you can do in these notes is just highlight my lines and then go ahead and type the word. If you want to get fancy, you can, of course, use bold or italic or another color. Okay, these notes are for you, so however you can make them stand out, go for it. All right, so back to foodborne illnesses. So the illness itself, right, is you eat or you drink something harmful and it makes you sick. An outbreak is when we have a real problem. A restaurant has an issue. They have a problem on their hands. Multiple people have gotten sick from eating the same food. Okay. Quick question. Have you ever had food poisoning? I've had food poisoning once to my knowledge. I might have had it more, but one time for sure, 100%. All right. So let's look at stats. Now, guys, I know it's 2020, almost 2021. These stats are old. However, it's the most recent data available. And it's really startling. Okay. So let's talk about how many people yearly in the United States of America are made sick from foodborne illness, how many people are hospitalized due to foodborne illness, and how many people actually die because of foodborne illness. This should startle you. So in the notes, add this 48 million. 48 million Americans are made sick by a foodborne illness every year. So let's think. The population of the United States is somewhere around 300 million. Let's round 48 up to 50. So 50 million. So 50-50, that's 100. 50-50, that's 200. 50-50, that's 300. 1/6, 1 in 6 people will get food poisoning every single year. Now, the next stat, 128,000 Americans are hospitalized due to foodborne illness. Okay, so that means it's so bad, their symptoms are so severe that they end up in the hospital. And finally, over 3,000 Americans die from contracting a foodborne illness every single year. That is staggering. That should really like make you step back for a second and give you pause. 3,000 people die from something they have eaten. Okay, we all eat. We eat 3 times a day. Some of us snack all day long, right? We never stop eating. We never stop drinking things. It's really startling and amazing to think that you can get so sick that you can die, all from food. And as you guys are in this course, the reason I hammer this home in the very beginning is because the power of life and death is in your hands as you prepare food. It is critical that you know this information and that it lives in the back of your brain every time you go in the kitchen, every time you wash your hands, um, every time you prepare food, you're thinking about this. I want you to keep yourself safe, and I want you to keep your friends, your family, and your classmates safe. Okay. So we have 4 categories of microorganisms to talk about. A microorganism, let's take it apart and say micro. Micro means small, right? Think about a microscope. If you're going to look through a microscope, you're going to see tiny things bigger. So an organism is just a living thing. It might be a cell. It might be a person. An organism is, a kind of a scientific unit of life. So we're talking about teeny tiny microscopic germs. So we have 4 categories. The first one is bacteria, which is defined as tiny single-celled microorganisms. Okay, tiny single-celled microorganisms. Bacteria, question for you. Is all bacteria bad? I hope you said no. There's so much good bacteria. We need bacteria. You guys eat bacteria. Do you eat yogurt? Guess what? You're probably eating 6 strains of living bacteria. We need bacteria in our bodies. There's so much good bacteria that lives in our gut that helps us, take in the nutrients and release what we don't need as we have bowel movements. That's, one thing that bacteria does for our bodies. So if we're not talking about a bacteria, we're talking about a virus. We all know viruses because we've all been in school forever, right? We know when one classmate starts to get a cold, more classmates are going to get the cold, right? We share those viruses, or the stomach bug is a virus, right? The flu is viral. So simple organisms that require a host to grow. A host means like they have to live inside of something. They don't just come out of thin air. So the host is typically a person. It might be an animal or a plant. It's some sort of living cell. So, for example, the common cold, right? It's viral. It can live briefly on a surface, on a non-living surface, like a table. Like, let's say I sneeze all over your table, and then class change, bell rings 5 minutes later. Is there still a living virus on your table? Yes. Can it continue to grow and reproduce? No. So most of the time, these viral episodes are passed person to person rather than like contact from the table, contact from a doorknob, contact from a shopping cart. Right now, what we're going through with COVID, same thing, right? We're dealing kind of with this viral pathogen. That's why we're all wearing masks and we're trying to contain all of our own droplets. Okay, parasites. If you have a pet, you probably know what a parasite is. Can you think of an example of a parasite? Think of it while I say the definition. Organisms that must live in or on a host to survive. Remember, we called a host a person or an animal. So it's a tiny little something that has to live on, not in necessarily, on a host to survive. So if you have a pet, I hope you're saying fleas. I hope you're saying ticks. In food, you're never going to, ingest a flea or a tick, but there are worms that occasionally show up in food. That is typically restricted to a couple of types of food. Number one, fish. Fish are a great source of worms. You might be shocked if you ever wanted to do a little digging and gross out Google image searching to see worms in fish. A second source can be pigs, pork products, especially if we get into less domesticated pork, like wild boar, animals like that. And some of your big game may also be more susceptible to worms. The last one is fungi, like molds, yeasts, mushrooms. Okay, I always have a lot of mushroom haters in my class. But mold, let's talk about that. Mold can actually be very good for us. Did you know that one of the most basic foundational life-saving medications is simply a mold? Have you ever heard of penicillin, amoxicillin? These are things that you take when you have an infection, antibiotics. Some of them are made from mold. We also eat mold if you like to eat blue cheese. That's an example of an edible mold. But sometimes mold, yeast, etc., can be harmful to your health. Now, pause. I'm going to give you a little comic relief. Are you ready? Favorite joke alert. Okay, so I got a joke for you. There's a mushroom, see, and he's a pretty cool guy. The mushroom walks into a bar, kind of swaggers on over, gets up to the counter, raps on the wooden bar. Hey, bartender, he says. I'd like to order a drink. The bartender, he's there. He's using his bar towels. He's polishing the glasses. He walks over slowly, a scowl on his face, and he says, "We don't serve your kind here." The mushroom, taken aback, says, "Aw, come on, why not? I'm a fun guy." Are you laughing? I don't hear enough laughing. Get it? A mushroom is a type of fungus. Plural of fungus is fungi. I'm a fun guy. Oh, it can only go up from here. Okay, so I'm going to do a little switcheroo with you. You may have to go jump in your notes. Okay, like I know we haven't talked about the three most susceptible groups yet. We'll get back to it. But we're going to go ahead and fill out the chart. So let me flip over here. This is the chart. Okay. All right. Whoops. So the chart, let's address this. We're going to start by going over what is the name of the foodborne illness, what foods is it associated with, what symptoms does it cause, and also like what are the sources? How does that even come to be? Excuse me. So E. coli, I hope you can kind of use your best guess. E. coli is commonly linked to ground beef. So E. coli sources. These are the things you're going to copy in your notes. E. coli lives in the intestines of infected animals. So typically we're talking about a cow. It can come from other animal sources, but if there is this bacteria is growing in a cow's intestines, it's going to come out in their feces. Hence the second source, which is fecally contaminated water. Feces, fecally refers to poop. Okay, so let's talk about runoff. Let's say there's a beautiful pasture and cows are grazing and living a happy life. They eat several times a day, they poop several times a day. Say there's a big rainstorm, right? And it washes through the field, and some of that cow dung gets washed down into a creek or a river downstream. Then let's say the water from the river is pulled up to irrigate a field of crops, right? So now potentially the cow poop has been contacted, kind of diluted in the water, and that contaminated water is now watering the crops. Now, let's say it's something where you eat the skin. Let's say it's a tomato. Okay. So if you don't thoroughly wash the skin of that tomato, you may end up with that E. coli on the outside of your tomato. Okay. Associated foods. Typically, we're talking about ground beef. I'm going to skip to number 3, produce, which produce again is just the big umbrella word for plant food, fruits and veggies. And then raw milk and cheese. Raw milk. Okay. Raw milk means milk straight out of the cow. So typically, and in the state of Florida, all of the milk that we are able to purchase at the grocery store or at the farmer's market has been heat treated. The fancy word for that is pasteurized. Okay, pasteurized milk. It's been heat treated. The heat kills bacteria. However, you can buy raw milk for quote unquote pet consumption. So there are some people who feel that there are nutritional benefits from the raw milk, the untreated, straight out of the cow milk. It is sold for pet consumption. Just 2 weeks ago, I was at a farmer's market and I overheard a vendor explaining to a customer, I can't sell this to you to drink. I can sell this for your pets. She was trying to sell raw milk. Okay. So the reason it is not legal to sell that is because it's not pasteurized and it could make people sick. But anyway, now you know what that is. Okay, symptoms. So if you have E. coli, if a person has E. coli, what are going to be the telling symptoms? Number 1, severe cramping in your stomach. Maybe you've experienced this before in conjunction with diarrhea. Number 2, bloody diarrhea. Not pleasant to say, not pleasant to talk about, not pleasant to experience, but that should alarm you. If you ever see that, you should absolutely seek medical attention. You're going to have nausea. You're probably going to have some vomiting, and you may have a low-grade fever. A low-grade fever means slightly elevated, 99, 100. That's kind of low grade, okay? So, Kevin's Law. We're going to watch a video. I'm going to save this until after my presentation, and I'm going to have you watch the video about Kevin's Law. This is a young boy who contracted E. coli, I believe, when he was 2 years old. So I'm going to have you hear his story. Okay, that'll be coming after. All right, salmonella. Using those context clues, what do you think salmonella is most closely associated with? Did you say eggs? Did you say chicken? You're correct. Okay. Salmonella is 100% the reason why your mom tells you, don't eat the raw cookie dough, right? How many of you have heard that? Me, I heard it growing up. How many of you have ignored that? Me, right? We're all taking a risk when we eat the raw cookie dough or the raw brownie batter. Now, I'll tell you, any day I would rather have like lick the spoon of brownie batter than eat a cooked brownie. Any day. To me, it's so much better. But there are raw eggs, and those raw eggs can make you very sick. So that's why you hear that warning. And that's why at school, we do not sample any raw products like that. Okay. At home, use your brain and think about what you want to do, but I encourage you not to let younger siblings do it. Okay, so if you have like a little preschool or kindergarten age brother or sister, do not allow them to have the raw cookie dough because they are much, much more susceptible to contracting a foodborne illness than you are. That's because they're young and their immune system is underdeveloped. Okay, salmonella, similar to E. coli, it lives in the intestines of animals. On your chart, you already typed that for E. coli. Go copy and paste it into the square for salmonella. Associated foods. So, what foods do we typically find this in? Raw meat, poultry and eggs, milk and dairy products, and raw produce. Okay, produce again meaning like fruits and veggies. And the symptoms, it's similar. There's a lot of similarities to E. coli. So stomach pain, stomach cramps, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, all that sounds the same. We get a little different by adding chills, fever, and headache. The fever for Salmonella may be a little higher than the fever you're going to experience with E. coli. Notice here there is no bloody diarrhea. Next, this is a fun one. So those are both examples, E. coli and Salmonella are both examples of bacteria. If you remember, let me kind of scroll up real fast. Oh boy. If you remember, we have 4 categories: bacteria, virus, parasite, fungi. We talked about 2 bacteria. Now we're going to hit a virus. Hepatitis A is a virus. Foodborne illnesses, there are tons more than I'm even going to cover today. However, there are only 2 that are viruses, that are viral. One is hepatitis A and the other is norovirus. We're going to discuss both. Okay, so hepatitis A. I gave you these pictures because they are great examples of the main symptom of hepatitis A. So if you look really closely, what I want you to notice is the color of the whites of the eyes and the color of the hand that's like closer to the camera in the foreground. All right. I hope you can see this well on your screen. They're both yellow. So these eyes have gone yellow. Even the skin has a yellowish tint on this face. And this hand is very yellow compared to the other hand beside it. So we'll get to that symptom in just a moment. Sources of hepatitis A. Hepatitis A comes from not animals, it comes from the intestines of humans. So if I'm sick with hepatitis A, my intestines are going to carry that virus. It can also come through contaminated water, but the water is typically contaminated with a human runoff. So this is a little gross. I'm going to just be very frank with you. Hepatitis A is typically spread, it's what we call the oral fecal route. Oral means mouth, fecal again means poop. Okay, so if a food handler, let's talk about maybe the person at Subway, okay, the person who's making your sub sandwich. Now I know they always wear gloves, but let's say that they had diarrhea. They were really sick, but they went to work anyway, and every 15 minutes they have to run to the bathroom and poop, right? So if they do not properly wash their hands, that full good 30 seconds scrubbing their nail beds and scrubbing between their hands and on the back of their hands and on their wrists, let's say there's fecal matter still on their hand, and they go and they touch your sandwich fixings that are going to go right in your mouth. That's how you contract something like hepatitis A or norovirus, the fecal oral route. Okay, so commonly associated foods. Look at the last bullet point first. It's basically anything that the infected food handler touches. Okay. Often we're talking about raw foods, foods that are not going to be cooked, salads, sandwiches, etc. It could come from beverages, water and ice. It could come from seafood, from contaminated waters. Okay. Hepatitis A symptoms. So fatigue. Fatigue means you're just so tired. Fatigue is a big symptom that we're hearing about with COVID. It means like you can't walk from your living room to your bathroom without feeling out of breath. Like you are just exhausted. Diarrhea and or dark urine. Fever, headache, nausea, loss of appetite, and here's the big one, guys. That yellowing of the skin and eyes is called jaundice. Okay, jaundice is going to be an important vocabulary term for you to learn. Now, people get jaundice because of a liver malfunction. That's what's technically happening here. Is you're having a problem with your liver, okay, when you get hepatitis A. And that's what makes your eyes and your skin go yellow. So sometimes people have hepatitis A and it's not food related, or excuse me, sometimes people have jaundice and it's not related to hepatitis A. It can be related to other liver malfunctions. Also, babies are often born with jaundice. You might ask your parents, have they ever known a baby or did any of their babies have jaundice? What will happen is the baby will be sent home from the hospital and they provide this little blanket that has lights in it. It's called a Billy blanket. And they wrap the baby in that blanket for a couple of days, and then they're able to kind of normalize, like the jaundice goes away and the baby is better. All right, norovirus. Norovirus, I think is super fascinating. I call it the cruise ship virus. So I have never been on a cruise in my whole life. I'm curious, have you been on a cruise? If so, where and do you recommend it? Now, in the time of COVID, I'm kind of skeeved out by cruises, but they used to be very attractive to me. So, about now this has nothing to do with the cruise ship. This stat: about 50% of all outbreaks of food-related illness are caused by norovirus. Far and away, this is the most common foodborne illness. Norovirus is keyword virus, viral, meaning it lives inside of a person and it's spread person to person. Same thing as the last one, it's typically spread by unclean hands. The food handler is sick, the food handler does not properly clean their hands after using the restroom, and then the food handler prepares your food and you ingest it. Now, I chose a cruise ship here because sometimes this happens on cruises. So we saw in the news in the spring, right, as all these cruise ships were kind of coming in as COVID was spreading, we would see that COVID rapidly spread around the ship, right? It's viral. Same thing with norovirus. Sometimes this happens if the dirty water gets mixed in with the clean water. So cruise ships have great big reservoirs of clean water, kind of gray water, like what comes out of the sinks, and then black water, which is basically what comes out of the toilet. So if there's ever any combining of those, it can, of course, make people terribly sick if they ingest that. All right. So if they drink it, they take that water in. So for foods related to norovirus, you're going to think about water, raw veggies and fresh fruits, okay, produce, salads, and shellfish. Similar to hepatitis A, it's a lot of things that are uncooked. Okay. Symptoms of norovirus: you might experience cramps, headaches, nausea and vomiting, and fever. It's usually fairly mild. Like you might have had norovirus in your life and not even known it. Norovirus is simply the stomach flu. So if you've ever had a weekend where like someone in your house had a bug, they got the stomach flu, they were vomiting and having diarrhea for 24 hours, and then your mom got it, and then you got it, and then your little sister got it, it's norovirus. It's very, very common. So it can spread other ways, but it does commonly spread through food, okay, and through that kind of contact. Now, notes. I know that you're missing a block here. You don't have sources. You have symptoms and you have foods. That's fine. Leave the block empty. All right, so this is the last one we're going to talk about, listeria. Listeria is, we're back to bacteria in terms of our pathogens. It's not viral. It's a bacteria, and I chose the ice cream cones because there have been frequent outbreaks in Bluebell ice cream. If you've ever had Bluebell, you probably know, number one, that it's delicious. It's one of my favorite ice cream brands. However, they were in the news for several years off and on because they continually had listeria outbreaks. So listeria is super dangerous, and I'm going to tell you why. First things first, it typically is associated with dairy products. Like I want you to kind of put in your brain ice cream. Also things like soft cheeses, and then deli meats and hot dogs. So those are the foods typically associated with listeria. It's a pathogen, a bacteria. So here's why listeria is terrible. Now the symptoms, you might feel like you have the flu, you may have a fever, you may have muscle aches. However, listeria is detrimental for pregnant women and babies. Okay, so if a pregnant woman contracts listeria, there is a chance that she will have a miscarriage or that her baby will be born with birth defects. Um, Man, this is something you could look up too if you were interested in it. You could see there's a couple of great like videos and articles about this where you can kind of see like what happens. It can be very, very severe and very life-threatening to the pregnant mother and to the baby. So it's super important that pregnant women are cautious around those foods. For example, like deli meat and hot dogs. Some pregnant women will take their lunch meats and heat them in the microwave to make sure that they have a chance to kill any sort of pathogen. Um, so best to avoid those products or be very careful with them. Okay, now I know you just did your chart, but we're going to go back to I think the very bottom of the front page of notes and talk about who is at risk. So anyone can get a foodborne illness at any time. However, most of us, healthy teenagers, healthy, younger adults, are not at a high elevated risk for foodborne illness or for complications from foodborne illness. If you or I get food poisoning, we're probably going to be sick for a day and we'll be back on our feet. We might have diarrhea, we might be uncomfortable, but we're probably going to be okay, not require hospitalization, and not have any ill effects. So, most at risk is young children, and by that I mean like birth to kindergarten, first grade. Okay, so pretty little kids. Elderly people, and by elderly, I don't know. I mean, it kind of varies, but I would say start at about 60 years old. And then anyone with a weakened immune system. So, someone who has cancer, for example, if their body is under attack, if they are going through chemotherapy or radiation, someone who is pregnant and has another human living off of their body, someone with an autoimmune disease. These people are the most at risk for foodborne illness because their immune systems are not strong. They have weak immune systems. They can't fight things off like you and I. Okay, so it's incredibly important that we seek to protect these populations specifically. All right, so now we know kind of like lots of scary facts about foodborne illness. You may never want to eat anything again, but I'm going to tell you a couple of important tips for prevention. First thing, before I go any further, let me tell you this. Probably the number one best thing that you could do for prevention is wash your hands and wash them thoroughly. Get in the habit of washing your hands and scrubbing them for 20 seconds. Sing the happy birthday song twice. Scrub everywhere. Get between the fingers, the nail beds, the back of the hands, the wrists, the front of the hands, all the way around your thumb. Wash your hands thoroughly every time you go to the bathroom, every time before you cook, every time before you eat. That is your number one best course of prevention. Okay, that will not prevent everything. That will not prevent every foodborne illness, but that will prevent the foodborne illnesses that are the most common. Okay. All right, cross-contamination. You guys have already done an assignment where I had you go and Google this. You had to look it up, but let's hit it again. You're going to need to understand the definition and examples. So, cross-contamination is the physical movement or transfer of harmful bacteria. So, bad germs, bad bacteria move around from one person, object, or place to another. So, there's yucky, harmful, gross bacteria on this thing, and then I touch something else and now it's on that thing. All right. It's a key factor in food poisoning and it has four common sources: food, people, equipment, and work surfaces. In the picture below, like on the screen, if you can kind of see that, it looks like there's a raw chicken in a pan. It looks like this person has put the chicken on the cutting board, picked it up. There's some juice, some kind of pinkish, blood and runoff from the chicken. And now they are chopping tomato and cucumbers for salad. Okay. So that tomato, which was fine, it was washed, it was clean, is now going to be covered in chicken juice, which very likely might have salmonella. Okay. So a person who's very innocently eating a salad could end up with salmonella. Okay, so when we're dealing with a cutting board, we always want to make sure that we use a clean cutting board. Cut your vegetables first, then cut your meat. Never cut meat and then cut vegetables without washing and sanitizing properly. Okay, this is a biggie, proper thawing. This is something that you might have to kindly educate your parents about. So I grew up in a house when both my parents worked full time. They might not get home until 5 or 5:30 in the evening, and my mom was normally the cook in our house. So she would be in a hurry trying to make, food for the family before work. She would take something out of the freezer, ground beef, chicken pieces, something like that, and she would stick them in the sink. Just lay them in the sink. And then when she came home, so let's see, that was probably about 7:30. When she came home at 5:30, that's 10 hours later, the meat would be thawed and she would cook it. Okay? That probably might happen in your house too. That's a pretty common practice. It's a scary practice. I encourage you and urge you not to do that and to share with your parents that it can be very dangerous because it grows bacteria rapidly. So best things to do to thaw your food out. Number one is use the refrigerator. It can take a couple days. It may not be instantaneous, but if you plan ahead, you can take things out of the freezer, pop them in the fridge, and they'll be thawed out. Second is the microwave. That's a great quick option. There are defrost settings on your microwave, so you can take something from frozen to thawed. Next, cold water. Okay, you can put, just like this picture shows you, you can put chicken or beef or pork or whatever the product is in a bowl and run cool water, not hot, cool water over it until it defrosts. It usually takes 30 minutes or so, sometimes a little longer. Or you can simply take something frozen and cook it from frozen. So let's fish sticks, corn dogs, chicken nuggets, anything you're going to get out of the freezer and just stick right into the oven or stick right into some hot grease to fry, that's cooking from frozen. Okay. So countertop, bad, refrigerator, microwave, cold water, those are good things. So the reason why it's a really bad idea to leave your food out on the counter is because of something called the temperature danger zone. So this is another something you're going to have to memorize and learn. At all times, our goal is to keep food out of the temperature danger zone. Sometimes I'm going to abbreviate this the TDZ, okay? So the temperature danger zone is the range of air temperature where bacteria grows the most rapidly. So the range is from 41 degrees Fahrenheit to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I'm going to explain to you what happens less than 41 degrees. Let's start with zero. We won't go into the sub-zero. Zero is typically the temperature of a freezer. Frozen solid, ice cold. Most refrigerators hover right around 40 degrees. So at 40 degrees, 30 degrees, 20 degrees, 10 degrees, 0 degrees, bacteria is so cold that it can barely grow. It can hardly move. It's sluggish. It can't reproduce very much. From 41 to 135 degrees, that's where the party happens. That bacteria is like, oh yeah, uh-huh, uh-huh. It's party time, okay? So the bacteria is going to get warm. The bacteria is going to get loose. The bacteria is going to get comfortable, and it is going to rapidly multiply, okay? Bacteria babies everywhere. So we can go from having 2 strains of bacteria to having 20,000 strains of bacteria. You would be shocked and amazed at how quickly and rapidly it multiplies. Now, when we get above 135 degrees, that's where it's like so hot that bacteria begins to die. Okay. When we cook our food, we stick a thermometer in our steak or our hamburger or our chicken breast, right? When we get up to 135, 145, 155, 165, that's where bacteria can no longer live. It has been killed due to heat. Okay? But don't forget about that. Oh yeah, that happy zone. 41 to 135. That's the most dangerous place where you can keep food. That's why it's important to store your leftovers quickly. Don't leave things laying out on the counter after you eat for hours. That's why if you go to a picnic or a family reunion, you don't want to eat the potato salad, the macaroni salad, the fried chicken after it's been out for 4 hours, right? Get rid of that stuff. So keep that number in your mind. Okay, now you have a chart to fill out. All right, you have one line for every item. So I'm going to go through this. When you cook meat, it is imperative that you cook meat to the proper temperature especially if you are serving an at-risk population. If you're feeding a little, kindergarten age sibling, if you're feeding somebody who already has a weak immune system, okay? So what I mean by these temperatures is this. You get a thermometer, you stick it into the meat, you literally pierce through it, and you let the thermometer take a reading, okay? So the temperatures I'm giving you are the temperatures at which the bacteria is dead. You should not have any issues. You should not get salmonella. You should not get E. coli. You should not contract listeria, nothing like that, if you cook your food to these temperatures. Now, I will tell you this, not everybody likes their food cooked this much. Let's talk about a steak. How do you like your steak? Do you like it rare, medium, medium well, well done? Personally, I like my steak medium rare. I like it to be red in the center. I like it to be a little bit bloody. I think it tastes good that way. That might gross some of you out. I think it's delicious. If I cook my steak to 145 degrees, to my taste, it's overdone. I don't want that. So I might cook my steak to 130 degrees. I am taking a risk with my food. There is a chance that I could contract a foodborne illness because my food is not properly cooked. Okay? So as an adult, a grown person, I can make that choice for myself, but I am aware of the potential consequences. All right, so let's fill in this chart. So all of these you can see are 145 degrees. So you're going to write on the chart 145 pork, ham, bacon, 145 roast, right? So 145 is basically almost all of our whole cuts of meat, like not ground meat, whole cuts of meat, anything that's pork, beef, or fish, okay? So pork, ham, bacon, a roast. Think about if you've ever had a pot roast, a roast beef, a mojo pork roast, pernil, anything like that. A steak, a veal, a lamb chop, fish, seafood, and sometimes eggs. Okay, now let's carry on. 155 only is one category. 155 is ground meat, ground beef, hamburgers, ground pork. We call that sausage in most cases. Okay, so ground pork, sausage, hamburger, 155. Now, 165 is the highest temperature that we ever need any food to cook. And 165 is poultry. Okay, let me give you some examples of poultry. Poultry means birds, edible birds. Chicken, duck, turkey, pheasant. What else do people sometimes eat? Quail. Any edible bird. Anything with wings. Okay, that's 165. Also 165 is stuffed meats and pastas. Let's say you have a stuffed lobster tail, you have a stuffed pork chop, you have manicotti pasta, or a casserole or stuffing. Okay. Now, okay, this is the last thing I'm going to show you. In the refrigerator, there's a certain way that we have to store food. When you're at home, your parents, lay out the refrigerator in whatever way makes sense to them. In my home, I don't follow this. In my kitchen at school, I do my best to follow this because this is proper in a commercial setting. This is proper in a restaurant, in food service. So we should store things in the refrigerator in a certain order. I want you to copy down this chart, and then we're going to try to wrestle with it and figure out why we store things this way. Okay, so now my refrigerator at home has like 2 shelves, period. At school, I have multiple shelves. All right, so we start with prepared foods on the top. Prepared foods, I'm talking about pasta salad, right? I already made it. It's chilling in the fridge. I'm talking about the cupcakes I made last night, right? Things that I've already cooked and I'm not going to cook again. Sandwiches. Underneath that, I'm going to put fruits and vegetables. All fruits and vegetables. Underneath that, I'm going to put fish and other forms of seafood. Maybe I have crab legs. Maybe I have clams or oysters. Underneath that, I'm going to put whole cuts of beef and pork. Whole cuts of beef and pork. So my pork chops, my steaks, my roasts. Underneath that, I'm going to put my ground meat, ground beef, sausages, and on the very, very bottom, I'm going to put poultry. Remember, poultry means birds. Okay. All right, so you're copying that. Now, I want you to compare that list to this list. Okay, 145, pork, ham, bacon, roast, steaks, veal, lamb, fish. 155, hamburger, 165, poultry. Okay, question for you. Why do we arrange things like this in the refrigerator? Why do we start with prepared foods on the very tip-top shelf? Why do we put poultry, chicken, turkey on the very bottom shelf? Okay, let's talk about it. So, if you'll notice, these go in order from least to greatest on the minimum internal cooking temperature. Prepared foods, there is no minimum internal cooking temperature. Fruits and vegetables, there is none. Fish and seafood, 145. Beef and whole cuts of pork, right? Whole beef, whole pork, 145. Ground meat, 155. Poultry, 165. So let's say we put poultry on the top shelf and we pushed everything else down. What happens if that package of chicken starts to leak? It drips, the cellophane loosens, and we get drip, 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 blood dripping on my cupcakes. Chicken juice dripping on my cut up watermelon, right? I can't eat that. There could be salmonella, right? Because we know that poultry is really susceptible to salmonella. And if that drip, drip, drips on some food that I'm never going to cook, I'm just going to ingest that. It could make me very sick. Now, let's say in the order they're in, okay, ground meat. Ground meat cooks to 155 degrees. What if my ground beef package starts to leak, right? Drip, 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 drips off the tray and it lands on my uncooked poultry. Well, ground meat cooks to 155 degrees. Poultry cooks to 165 degrees. When I have cooked that poultry totally and completely, I will have already killed any potential pathogen from the ground meat because I cooked it an entire 10 degrees hotter than I had to cook the ground meat. So any kind of pathogen that was on the ground meat is going to be burned off, killed, dead when I cook my poultry. Okay, guys, that was a lot of notes. Thanks for being good listeners. More to come.